The Helios station's observation deck offered an unparalleled view of the approaching Virecath vessel. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the reinforced plasteel window, absently stirring her third cup of coffee while reviewing bio readings on her tablet. The alien ship resembled a massive dark opal, its surface shifting with colors that shouldn't exist in normal space. Dr. Chen, they're requesting preliminary empathic contact, announced Station Director Matthews, his voice tight with tension. Are you sure you want to be our first point of contact? The psychological impact of alien minds is precisely why I'm here. Sarah finished, taking another sip of coffee. Besides, I've spent the last decade preparing for this moment. Let's not keep our guests waiting. The station's diplomatic suite had been specially modified for this encounter. The Virecath had sent detailed specifications about their environmental needs, but what fascinated Sarah most were their requirements for emotional dampening fields. Every other species they'd contacted had apparently needed them. The first Virecath to enter the suite moved like liquid mercury. Their bodies seemed to shift between solid and translucent states, with clusters of iridescent organs visible beneath their surface. Sarah's instruments recorded everything, but her attention was fixed on their behavior. They moved with the careful precision of beings expecting to encounter terror. Lara, their lead diplomat, approached the partition separating their atmospheres. Their form stabilized into something vaguely humanoid, though their surface continued to ripple with colors that made Sarah's eyes water. Greetings, Dr. Chen. Lara's words appeared in Sarah's mind, accompanied by gentle empathic probes. We will begin with standard fear management protocols. Oh, that won't be necessary, Sarah interrupted, earning a shocked ripple of color from the alien delegation. I'm quite comfortable proceeding without dampeners. The Virecath delegation's colors shifted rapidly, their equivalent of agitated whispers. Lara's form flickered, a sign of emotional disturbance that Sarah noted for later analysis. Dr. Chen. Lara's mental voice carried confusion. Our empathic scans indicate you are experiencing minimal fear response. This is unprecedented. Our appearance alone typically triggers significant terror in newly contacted species. Sarah shrugged, pulling up her tablet's display. Well, you are fascinating, but I've seen scarier things in a high school cafeteria. Would you like to see my preliminary analysis of your biosignatures? I have some questions about your chromatic emotional responses. The Virecath delegation's colors frozen in patterns, Sarah immediately documented. Lara moved closer to the partition, their form shifting to better study Sarah's face. You are taking notes. Lara's mental voice carried disbelief, while experiencing direct contact with an unknown alien consciousness. Of course, Sarah replied, adding another observation to her tablet. It's literally my job. Besides, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Do you know how long we've waited to confirm the existence of empathic species? Your capabilities could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. The delegation's colors began cycling through patterns so quickly that Sarah's instruments had trouble keeping up. She noticed their emotional dampening equipment was actively scanning her, probably trying to detect whatever technology they assumed was protecting her mind. There must be some mistake, one of the junior diplomats projected. The human's fear response is, it's as if I'm more excited than afraid, Sarah suggested, finally looking up from her tablet. That's because I am. Look, I understand you're used to species being terrified of the unknown. Humanity used to be like that too. But we learned something important over the centuries. Fear is just another data point. It's information, not a command. Lara's form completely stabilized. A sign of intense focus, Sarah noted. Why aren't you scared, human? Sarah considered the question carefully, aware that her answer could set the tone for humanity's entire relationship with the Virecath. She thought about all the preparation that had led to this moment, all the psychological training and xenobiological theory. In the end, she decided on honesty. Because fear is how we know we're about to learn something new, she said, meeting Xelura's gaze. "And learning new things. That's what humans live for." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft beep of Sarah's instruments recording the Virkath's extraordinary emotional response. She'd need weeks to analyze all this data, assuming they'd let her. Based on their reactions, she suspected she'd get that chance and more. "You are not what we expected," Xelura finally projected. Sarah grinned, already composing her preliminary report in her head. "I get that a lot. Now, about those biosignatures. I have a theory about the relationship between your chromatic shifts and emotional states. Would you be willing to help me test it?" As she began arranging her instruments for more detailed scans, Sarah noticed the Virkath's colors shifting into entirely new patterns. She'd study the recordings later to confirm, but she was pretty sure she'd just witnessed the alien equivalent of bewildered laughter. First contact was going even better than she'd hoped. The Virkath homeworld wasn't what Sarah had expected. Instead of the crystalline spires or organic architecture she'd imagined, their cities were built around massive machines, sprawling networks of technology that pulsed with the same shifting colors as their creators. It took her 3 days to realize what she was looking at. "These are fear management systems, aren't they?" she asked Xelura as they stood in one of the primary control centers. The walls were alive with flowing data, patterns that made Sarah's head hurt if she looked at them too long. "Correct." Xelura's form rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as approval. "They maintain emotional homeostasis for our entire civilization. Without them, their colors darkened momentarily before stabilizing." Sarah frowned at her readings. "But these systems are running at nearly maximum capacity. That's not normal, is it?" The question sent a visible shudder through the room's other occupants. Sarah had gotten used to that reaction. The Virkath still hadn't adjusted to her direct questioning. What caught her attention was the way Xelura's colors shifted to block certain patterns from her view. "The systems are functioning within acceptable parameters," Xelura projected, but their mental voice carried undertones Sarah's instruments registered as stress. She was about to press further when a commotion erupted near one of the data terminals. A junior researcher, Sarah recognized them as Nelix from their color patterns, was backing away from their station, their form becoming dangerously unstable. "I can't. The calculations. It's not possible." Nelix's mental voice was fracturing, their colors cycling through patterns Sarah's instruments couldn't even record. The other Virkath moved to activate emergency dampening protocols, but Sarah was faster. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides, pulled her ever-present thermos from her bag, and thrust it toward the panicking alien. "Here," she said firmly. "Coffee first, existential crisis second. Trust me, it helps." The sheer unexpectedness of her action seemed to snap Nelix out of their spiral. Their form partially stabilized as they stared at the offered drink. "But the equations, you don't understand what they mean," Nelix projected weakly. "So explain it to me," Sarah said, settling down next to them. "I'm pretty good with terrifying revelations. It's kind of my specialty." The other Virkath were frozen in place, their colors a chaotic mix of horror and fascination. Xelura moved to intervene, but Sarah held up a hand. "Your fear management systems are working overtime for a reason," she said, meeting Xelura's gaze. "I'm guessing Nelix just found out why. So instead of suppressing it, why don't we try understanding it?" There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the soft hum of the machines around them. Finally, Xelura's form shifted into what Sarah recognized as their equivalent of a sigh. "Show her," they projected to Nelix. The junior researcher's colors stabilized enough to operate their terminal. Data flowed across the screens, equations and models that made Sarah's eyes widen. She wasn't a physicist, but she understood enough to grasp the implications. The fabric of space-time. It's not just curved. It's wounded, she breathed, leaning closer to the displays. "And the wound is getting worse," Nelix completed. "The barriers between dimensions are weakening. What lies beyond? Their form began to destabilize again. Sarah took a long drink of her coffee, her mind racing. Okay, that's admittedly pretty terrifying. But you know what this reminds me of? Lovecraft. Love. Craft. Axelara projected confusion. An old Earth author. He wrote stories about cosmic horrors beyond human comprehension. The funny thing is, his work became incredibly popular. Humans took these terrifying concepts and turned them into entertainment, into ways to explore and process our fear of the unknown. The Virkath's colors shifted in patterns Sarah hadn't seen before. You create art about such things. Deliberately expose yourselves to cosmic horror. Sarah grinned. We do more than that. We make jokes about it, write songs about it, dress up as cosmic horrors for fun. It's how we cope. Instead of running from the darkness, we learn to dance with it. She turned back to the equations, her expression thoughtful. These readings, they're not just theoretical, are they? You've detected something specific. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Axelara's form shifted closer to the fear management systems. There are things in this universe, Dr. Chen, that no species was meant to comprehend. The fact that your kind turned such horrors into entertainment is perhaps the most terrifying thing we have yet learned about humanity. Sarah's grin widened. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait until I tell you about our ancient practice of gathering in dark places to tell scary stories around fires. But first, she turned back to Nelix, who had finally started to stabilize. Why don't you walk me through these calculations? I have a feeling we're going to need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. As Nelix began explaining, Sarah couldn't help but notice how the fear management systems seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Something was coming, something that had the Virkath terrified beyond their considerable technological ability to cope. But where they saw only horror, she saw opportunity. After all, humanity had been preparing for moments like this for centuries. They just didn't know it at the time. The Virkath archives were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Crystalline structures that contained not just information, but the emotional resonance of those who had recorded it. Sarah had spent 3 days here, following a trail of increasingly disturbing data. And now she finally understood why the Virkath were so afraid. 17 civilizations, she muttered, scrolling through the records on her tablet. All of them reached this same point. All of them saw what was coming. And all of them chose extinction over facing it. Axelara completed, their form a subdued silver. Some destroyed themselves outright. Others retreated so deeply into isolation that they effectively ceased to exist as spacefaring species. We are the only ones who found a way to continue. Sarah stood up from her workstation, pacing the crystalline chamber. By developing technology to suppress your fear response. But that's not really solving the problem, is it? It's just letting you function while the threat gets closer. The archives around them pulsed with stored memories of terror. Sarah had learned to interpret some of the patterns now. Species after species encountering something in deep space that shattered their understanding of reality. The records became fragmented after that, breaking down into chaos or silence. What I don't understand, Sarah said, turning back to Axelara, is why you haven't found these records in human space. We've been exploring the cosmos for centuries now. We must have encountered the same phenomena. Axelara's colors shifted to what Sarah recognized as their equivalent of embarrassment. We have found such records, but they make no sense to us. When your species encounters cosmic horrors, we what? Sarah prompted, curious. You study them, document them, create theories about them. And then, most incomprehensibly, you create entertainment about them. Fiction, games, cultural references that spread across your population. Sarah couldn't help laughing. Of course we do. It's how we process things that should, by all rights, break our minds. We take the darkness and make it ours. She pulled up some files on her tablet, research she'd been conducting in parallel with her archive diving. Look at this. Humanity has been preparing for cosmic horror for generations without even realizing it. Every story about elder gods, every tale of incomprehensible beings, every piece of media about humanity facing the impossible. It's all been psychological vaccination. Celara moved closer to examine the data, their form flickering with disbelief. But these are clearly representations of the exact entities that drove other species to extinction. Your people encountered them and turned them into entertainment products. Better than that, Sarah said, warming to her topic. We've been actively theorizing about how to deal with them. Every story where humanity overcomes cosmic horror is another potential strategy. We've been crowdsourcing solutions to problems we didn't even know were real. The archive chamber's crystals pulsed with stored terror, but Sarah noticed something interesting. Where her excitement touched them, they seemed to resonate differently. She wasn't just seeing the records anymore. She was adding to them. There's something else in these archives, she said slowly, following a pattern she'd only just noticed. Something about what's approaching now. Something you haven't told me. Celara's form became almost transparent. Their version of pale fear. How did you? Pattern recognition. It's another human trait that seems to disturb you. We're really good at seeing connections, even in chaos, especially in chaos. She met Celara's gaze steadily. What's really out there? The archive crystals around them began to pulse with new intensity. Celara's form stabilized into something more solid than Sarah had ever seen. A sign, she'd learned, of desperate resolve. We call them the Void Dancers, Celara projected, their mental voice heavy with dread. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on fear itself. Every civilization that discovered them was consumed, their collective terror becoming sustenance for these entities. Sarah absorbed this, her mind already racing with possibilities. Feed on fear itself. That's actually fascinating from a theoretical perspective. But wait. She pulled up more human cultural references on her tablet. We've literally written stories about exactly this kind of thing. Multiple stories, with multiple different solutions. Celara's colors swirled in patterns of confusion and disbelief. You're doing it again, treating cosmic horror as a problem to be solved rather than a truth to be fled from. Because that's what humans do, Sarah said simply. We don't just face our fears. We study them, understand them, and figure out how to overcome them. And sometimes we even learn to dance with them ourselves. The archive crystals hummed with the weight of her words, recording this moment for future generations. Sarah wondered what they would make of it. The first time a species had looked into the abyss, and instead of running away screaming, had started taking notes. The emergency alert split the air with a sound that existed somewhere between a scream and a song. Sarah looked up from her research station in the Virekath Science Center, watching as the normally composed aliens around her erupted into patterns of barely controlled panic. They're here. Celara's mental voice carried undertones Sarah had never heard before. The Void Dancers. Our long-range sensors have detected their approach. We thought we had more time. Sarah was already moving to the main sensor display, her tablet ready to record data. Show me. The display shifted, revealing something that shouldn't exist in normal spacetime. It was like watching a hole being torn in reality itself, but the hole was moving with purpose. Sarah's instruments were registering readings that made absolutely no sense. And yet, something about them seemed familiar. Fascinating, she muttered, making notes. The way they distort space around them. It's almost like they're feeding on the potential energy of fear itself. The more terror they create, the more the local physics break down in their favor. Dr. Chen, Celara projected urgently, this is not the time for scientific observation. We need to activate our highest-level fear suppression protocols immediately. But Sarah was barely listening, her mind racing through possibilities. No, wait. Look at these patterns. They're not random. The Void Dancers aren't just causing chaos. They're creating specific distortions, almost like. Like what? Cellara demanded, their form flickering between states of matter. Like they're dancing, Sarah said slowly, a grin spreading across her face. They're actually dancing. That's not just a name you gave them. It's literally what they're doing. They're performing a physics-defying ballet across space-time, and the terror they create is just music to them. The entire science center had gone silent, every Virecalf staring at her in what she recognized as their version of horror. Even their fear management systems seemed to pulse more intensely. "You're taking notes about the entities that have destroyed civilizations," one of the senior researchers projected weakly, while smiling. "Of course I am," Sarah replied, still typing. "This is incredible. We're witnessing something that completely rewrites our understanding of reality. Do you know how many physics papers are going to come out of this? The grants alone will be..." She was interrupted by a massive surge in the sensor readings. The void dancers were accelerating, their reality warping dance growing more complex. Around her, the Virecalf's colors began to strobe in patterns of deep distress. "The fear management systems," Sarah projected urgently. "They're not. They can't." Sarah watched as the massive machines that kept the Virecalf civilization functioning began to strain under the load. The approaching entities weren't just causing fear, they were weaponizing it, turning the Virecalf's own terror against them. "Your systems are failing because they're trying to suppress something that can't be suppressed," Sarah realized. "You can't fight this with technology alone. You need..." She paused, an idea forming. "Need what?" Laura demanded, their form barely maintaining coherence. Sarah began pulling up files on her tablet. Human cultural references, psychological studies, and most importantly, dance patterns. "You need to learn how to dance back." "Dance back?" The confusion in Laura's mental voice momentarily overcame their fear. "Look at the data," Sarah explained, her excitement growing. "The void dancers create terror by moving in ways that shouldn't be possible, right? But what if that's not just an attack? What if it's an invitation? What if they're waiting for someone to answer their dance?" The senior researchers were projecting protests, but Sarah noticed something interesting. Some of the younger Virecalf were watching her with colors she'd never seen before. Colors that reminded her, oddly enough, of human children seeing their first magic trick. "You're suggesting we attempt to communicate with cosmic horrors through reality-defying movement patterns." Laura's mental voice was faint with disbelief. "Why not?" Sarah grinned, already sketching out possibilities. "Humans have been imagining ways to communicate with cosmic entities for centuries. We've written entire stories about learning to speak their language, to see through their eyes, to move the way they move. Maybe all those stories weren't just fiction. Maybe they were preparation." She turned to the assembled Virecalf, her eyes bright with possibility. "Your fear management systems are going to fail. That's not a guess. It's a certainty. These entities feed on fear itself, and you've been teaching yourselves to suppress fear rather than transform it. But humans, we've been practicing something else entirely." The sensor displays showed the void dancers drawing closer, their impossible movements sending ripples through space-time. But Sarah wasn't watching them anymore. She was watching the young Virecalf researcher who had moved to her side, their colors shifting into something that looked almost like hope. "Teach us," they projected simply. Sarah's grin widened. "First lesson. Sometimes the best way to deal with terror isn't to run from it or fight it. It's to ask it for a dance." The collapse of the fear management systems began like a cascade of falling stars. Sarah watched from the central control hub as segments of the massive network began shutting down, one after another, their shifting colors fading to dull gray. Around her, the Virecalf were experiencing something they hadn't faced in generations: unfiltered fear. "Status report," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. The few human scientists who had joined her on the Virecalf homeworld were scattered throughout the city, implementing her hastily devised plan. "Western Quadrant is down," Dr. James Rodriguez reported through her comm. "But you should see this, Sarah. Some of the younger Virecalf. They're actually handling it better than expected." A flash of satisfaction crossed Sarah's face. They're the ones who've been watching human entertainment feeds. Amazing what a few horror movies can teach you about facing your fears. The main display showed the void dancers drawing ever closer, their reality warping dance sending ripples through space-time that made Sarah's eyes water. But she wasn't focused on them. She was watching the Virkath's response. "See, Lara," she called out, spotting the diplomat's distinctive silver form. "How are the cultural integration teams doing?" See, Lara's form stabilized enough to project coherently, though the concept of gallows humor is proving surprisingly effective. Several groups have begun generating what you would call memes about our situation. I don't understand how this helps, but their fear readings are 15% lower than predicted. Sarah grinned. Humor in the face of horror, humanity's first line of defense. But that's just the beginning. How's the music integration coming along? Dr. Chen, a young Virkath researcher, her colors cycling through excited patterns, rushed into the control hub. The resonance experiments. They're working. When we match our color shifts to human music patterns, we can actually maintain stability without the fear management systems. This was what Sarah had been waiting for. She'd noticed early on that the Virkath's color shifting wasn't just emotional expression. It was a form of natural resonance with the universe around them. The fear management systems had been suppressing not just their terror, but their ability to adapt and respond naturally to cosmic phenomena. "Show me," she ordered, pulling up the relevant data streams. The young researcher, Velix, she remembered, projected a series of complex color patterns. They matched perfectly with the rhythm of the human music now playing throughout the city's remaining functional systems. Earth classics, everything from classical to heavy metal, chosen specifically for their ability to help process intense emotions. "It's not just the music," Velix projected excitedly. "The human concept of catharsis. We're beginning to understand it. When we allow ourselves to feel the fear while maintaining rhythm." A massive tremor shook the control hub. The void dancers were close enough now that their dance was affecting local gravity. Sarah grabbed her tablet, checking the readings. "They're responding," she breathed, watching the patterns. "The void dancers. They're altering their approach vectors. They've never encountered anything like this before." Around her, the remaining fear management systems were shutting down, but something extraordinary was happening. Instead of collapsing into terror, more and more Virkath were joining what Sarah had started calling the resonance dance. Their natural color-shifting abilities, freed from technological suppression, were creating patterns that somehow both acknowledged and transcended fear. "Dr. Chen," Lara projected urgently, "the entity readings, they are changing." Sarah was already analyzing the data. The void dancers' reality warping effects were still intense, but they'd lost their earlier predatory focus. They seemed almost curious. They're used to their prey either running away or freezing in terror, Sarah explained, excitement coloring her voice. But this? A species choosing to dance with their fear instead of being paralyzed by it. This is new to them. A junior researcher burst into the hub, their colors bright with what Sarah now recognized as a mix of terror and exhilaration. The Human Entertainment Archives. Everyone's requesting access. They're not just watching the horror movies anymore. They're using them as training manuals. Sarah couldn't help laughing. Decades of human horror media. Everything from Lovecraft to modern cosmic horror films were being devoured by Virkath, trying to understand new ways of processing fear. What had started as her desperate attempt to help them cope had evolved into something unprecedented, a cultural revolution in real time. "Send new data packets to all sectors," she ordered. "Focus on stories about communication with cosmic entities, and get me a direct line to the resonance teams. If we're going to survive this, we need to go all in on the dance." As she worked, Sarah caught glimpses of her own reflection in the control hub's crystalline walls. She was grinning, her eyes bright with the kind of mad excitement that had always made other humans nervous. But now, surrounded by aliens learning to dance with their fears, she finally felt at home. The Void Dancers were coming, yes, but for the first time in their ancient history, they were about to meet a civilization that didn't just feel fear. It transformed it into art. "Tell me a story," Sarah said, her voice calm despite the reality-bending chaos visible through the observation dome. Around her, a group of young Verikath shifted their colors in patterns of confusion. Story. Velix projected. "But the Void Dancers are less than 6 hours from direct contact. We should be preparing." "This is preparing," Sarah interrupted, setting up her instruments. The modified empathic technology would let her demonstrate what she'd been trying to explain. "Humans have been preparing for this moment for centuries. We just didn't know it. Now, tell me what scares you most about them." The Verikath exchanged uncertain color patterns before Velix spoke. They break reality itself. Their dance tears holes in space-time. How can anyone face something that denies the basic laws of existence? Sarah smiled, activating the empathic link. "Let me show you something. On Earth, we have a tradition called camping. Sometimes, when we go camping, we sit around fires in the dark and tell scary stories. Want to know why?" Through the empathic connection, she shared the memory. The crackling of flames, the darkness pressing in, the delicious thrill of controlled fear as tales of the unknown were shared. The Verikath's colors shifted in fascination. "You deliberately frighten each other for enjoyment." Another young researcher, Nelix, projected incredulity. "Better than that," Sarah said, deepening the connection. "We learn to play with our fears. Watch this." She brought up footage from Earth's archives. Horror movies, cosmic horror literature, art that dealt with impossible geometries and reality-breaking entities. Through the empathic link, the Verikath didn't just see it. They felt the complex human emotional responses. "You feel that?" Sarah asked. "The fear is still there, but it's not alone anymore. There's wonder mixed in, curiosity, even joy." Humans learn to experience all these emotions simultaneously. The observation dome's sensors screamed new warnings. The Void Dancers' approach was warping local space-time even more severely. But instead of panicking, the young Verikath were watching with new eyes. Their movements, Velix projected suddenly. They're not random destruction. There's a pattern. Like the horror art you showed us, but in 4 dimensions. Exactly. Sarah's excitement bled through the empathic link. They're not just destroying reality. They're rewriting it, creating new geometries, new possibilities. And you know what? Humans have been imagining this exact scenario for generations. She shared more memories. Thousands of stories where humanity encountered cosmic entities that defied comprehension. But instead of focusing on the terror, she highlighted the moments of breakthrough, of understanding, of transformation. "Your fear management systems were wrong from the start," she explained, watching as understanding bloomed in the Verikath's color patterns. "You can't suppress fear of the unknown. It's fundamental to conscious existence. But you can transform it, channel it, use it as fuel for something new." Through the dome, they watched as the Void Dancers' reality warping dance grew more complex. But now, thanks to the shared human perspectives, the young Verikath were seeing it differently. "It's beautiful," Nelix projected softly. "Terrifying, yes, but beautiful." Sarah nodded, her instruments recording everything. That's the secret humans discovered through centuries of telling scary stories. The most terrifying things in existence can also be the most beautiful if you're brave enough to really look at them. She brought up the latest sensor readings. The Void Dancers aren't just approaching anymore. They're responding to us, to this new way of perceiving them. No species has ever done this before, faced them with fear and fascination instead of just terror. The young Verikath were changing, their colors shifting into entirely new patterns. Through the empathic link, Sarah could feel their fear transforming into something else, something that reminded her of humans watching their first sunset or discovering their first scientific breakthrough. "We're going to survive this," Velix projected with growing confidence, Not by running away or hiding behind technology, but by learning to dance with our darkness, Sarah finished, grinning as she watched the Void Dancer's patterns shift in response to the Virkath's changing emotional resonance. Now, who wants to learn some really old human horror stories? I think it's time we taught these cosmic entities about the concept of audience participation. The Virkath Central Plaza had become something unprecedented in the species' history, a dance floor. Sarah stood at its edge, watching as thousands of aliens shifted their colors in complex patterns that somehow matched the rhythm of Earth's most powerful music. The fear management systems lay dormant, their gray hulks silent witnesses to the revolution taking place. Status report. She called into her comm, checking the readings on her tablet. The Void Dancers were now close enough that their presence distorted the very air. Eastern Sector reporting. Dr. Rodriguez's voice crackled back. You won't believe this, Sarah. The Virkath aren't just copying human responses anymore. They're creating their own. New art forms, new music, new ways of processing fear. It's like they've unleashed centuries of suppressed creativity all at once. Sarah grinned, watching as a group of young Virkath demonstrated their latest innovation. Color patterns that deliberately mimicked the Void Dancer's reality warping movements, but with a distinctly Virkath twist. It was terrifying and beautiful, and somehow deeply funny all at once. Dr. Chen. Hexi Lara materialized beside her, their form more stable than it had been in days. The council has reviewed your latest proposal. They agree. All of it? Sarah asked, surprised. Even the part about the broadcasting stations. Even that. Hexi Lara's colors shifted in what Sarah now recognized as their version of nervous laughter. Though I must admit, using our planetary defense network to transmit human entertainment into the path of cosmic horrors is not something I ever expected to approve. Sarah checked her tablet again. The Void Dancer's approach had changed subtly but significantly. They were still coming, still warping reality with their dance, but their patterns had shifted. They were responding to the Virkath's broadcast, to the strange mix of terror and creativity being beamed into their path. Look at their trajectory changes, she pointed out. They're not just hunting anymore. They're curious, maybe even confused. No species has ever responded to them like this before. A massive tremor shook the plaza as another reality wave hit. But instead of panicking, the gathered Virkath incorporated the shaking into their dance. Sarah watched in amazement as they turned their terror into art in real time. Their natural color-shifting abilities, free from technological suppression for the first time in generations. We're getting readings from the outer sensors. A young researcher rushed up, their colors bright with excitement. The Void Dancers, they are attempting to match our patterns, not to mock or destroy them, but to dance with us. Sarah finished, her grin widening. They're cosmic horrors that feed on fear, yes, but they're also artists in their own way. Maybe that's what they've been looking for all this time, not just prey, but an audience that could appreciate their performance. Through the plaza's massive windows, they could see the sky beginning to twist in impossible ways as the Void Dancers drew closer. But the Virkath kept dancing, their colors shifting in patterns that acknowledged their terror while transforming it into something new. I don't understand something. Lara projected suddenly. Our scientists have analyzed human biology extensively. Your species experiences fear as intensely as any other. So why aren't you scared, Dr. Chen? Why aren't any of the humans scared? Sarah watched as another group of Virkath began experimenting with a new pattern, this one inspired by old Earth jazz improvisation. Oh, we're terrified, she said cheerfully. Absolutely, completely terrified. But humans learned something important a long time ago. Being scared doesn't mean you have to stop doing what needs to be done. Sometimes, being scared just means you're about to discover something amazing. The air itself was beginning to distort now, reality bending in ways that should have driven everyone mad with fear. Instead, the plaza had become a celebration of that very madness, with Virkath and humans alike turning their terror into a performance that rivaled the Void Dancers themselves. Besides, Sarah added, checking her instruments one last time, how often do you get the chance to teach cosmic horrors about human culture? The grant money alone is going to be incredible, assuming we survive, of course. And as the sky above them opened into impossible geometries, as the Void Dancers began their final approach, Sarah could have sworn she heard something that shouldn't have been possible. The sound of cosmic horrors learning to laugh. The moment of contact wasn't what anyone had expected. There was no catastrophic reality collapse, no mass descent into madness, no extinction-level event. Instead, as the Void Dancers finally reached the Virkath homeworld, something unprecedented happened. They paused. Sarah stood in the central plaza, surrounded by thousands of Virkath, whose colors shifted in patterns that would have driven them mad just days ago. Above them, the sky had become an impossible artwork of twisted spacetime, as the cosmic entities tried to match the rhythms being broadcast from the planet below. They're actually attempting to communicate, Celara projected in disbelief. After eons of simply consuming civilizations through terror, they're improvising, Sarah corrected, watching the patterns with professional fascination. Look at how they're incorporating elements of Virkath color shifting into their reality warping. They're not just dancing anymore. They're responding to their audience. The young researcher Velix, who had been monitoring the sensors, suddenly flared in patterns of excitement. Dr. Chen. The readings. They're stabilizing. The Void Dancers are actually modulating their effect on local space-time to match our resonance patterns. Sarah grinned, checking her own instruments. What they were witnessing wasn't just first contact with cosmic horrors. It was the birth of an entirely new form of communication. The Void Dancers, entities that had evolved to feed on fear, were learning to appreciate something more complex: artistic collaboration. Dr. Chen. Celara projected suddenly, their form shifting with uncertainty. I must ask one final time. Why aren't you scared? Even now, facing entities that defy the laws of physics, that have destroyed countless civilizations. Sarah looked up at the impossible dance taking place above them, at the cosmic horrors that were gradually learning to play with their food instead of simply consuming it. Her grin widened. Oh, I'm absolutely terrified, she said cheerfully. My heart's racing, my palms are sweating, and part of my brain is screaming that none of this should be possible. But you know what? That's exactly how I felt before my first dissertation defense, and I survived it just fine. A ripple of what could only be described as laughter spread through the gathered Virkath, their colors creating patterns that would have overloaded their fear management systems just days ago. They had learned something that humanity had known for generations. Sometimes the best way to face terror was to embrace it, transform it, and make it your own. Above them, the Void Dancers began a new movement, their reality warping dance incorporating elements of every art form the Virkath had broadcast into space. It was terrifying and beautiful and somehow deeply funny, like watching elder gods learn to breakdance. You know what this means, Sarah said, already drafting research proposals in her head. We're going to need a whole new field of study. Xenochoreography of cosmic entities, cross-dimensional art therapy. The funding possibilities are endless. You're thinking about research grants, while reality itself is being rewritten by ancient cosmic horrors, Celara projected, their form flickering between exasperation and admiration. Of course, Sarah replied, watching as another group of young Virkath began experimenting with new color patterns, their fear transformed into creative energy. That's another thing humanity learned a long time ago. There's no terror so great that it can't be turned into an academic paper. As if in response, the Void Dancers shifted their pattern again, creating geometries that should have shattered minds, but instead inspired a wave of artistic innovation among the watching Virkath. The cosmic horrors that had once fed on fear were learning to appreciate a more complex emotional diet. We're going to survive this, Celara projected suddenly, their certainty bleeding through the empathic link. Not just survive, We're going to thrive. Everything we thought we knew about cosmic horror is just the beginning." Sarah finished, her eyes bright with the kind of madness that had driven human discovery for centuries. After all, what's the point of encountering impossible cosmic entities if you can't teach them to appreciate a good story? And as the Void Dancers continued their transformed performance above the Virecraft homeworld, as ancient cosmic horrors learned to dance with the creatures that should have been their prey, Sarah couldn't help but think that this was exactly what humanity had been preparing for all along. Not to run from the darkness, not to fight it, but to invite it to join the dance. Because in the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the universe, the ability to look into the abyss and, instead of screaming, ask it if it knew how to waltz.